Have you ever read a story and wondered, how did they do that? Not in a good way, but how could they possibly do that horrible thing? You know, hindsight's 20/20, and sometimes when we read through these different stories in the Bible, we don't really see it from their perspective. And so today what I'd like to do is add some perspective. I'd like to pull this story apart into a couple different narratives. I will do my best to keep it in chronological order, but I will be jumping through all of the Gospels in order to do that. So if you'll bear with me, we're going to start with the crowds and culture. So to give you a little background, this is the day of the Passover festival, where the city of Jerusalem will swell to 3 times its normal population. This is going to bring old friends and old family together. Pilgrims and locals will all join in celebration to remember, to worship, and of course to eat. That's the most important thing. Due to the high numbers, many will be camping outside of the city, some even to the west side of the city. There's this nice area to the west, if you look at the old topology maps, just outside of the palace of Herod. This is the current Praetorium, and this is where Pilate performs his freedom ritual every year. So the crowds would be gathered there even before the sun rises in the early morning under the shade of the walls, hoping that they'll get to see one of their heroes go free that day. But history makes them wary. You see, old Herod is dead and in the ground 8 miles south, but they don't feel a victory over that because this day also marks the anniversary of the Passover bloodbath, where we believe several thousand people were massacred in their very own temple. Even the young in these crowds would know the recent troubles caused by Governor Pilate. First, he smuggled idols into the city, which very nearly caused a revolt and another bloodbath. He used sacred funds to pay for a new aqueduct, which they did not agree with, and that caused a massive protest and almost another revolt and almost another bloodbath. And more recently, the crowds have heard of Galilean pilgrims that were executed while they were making offerings. That's even mentioned in Luke 13. The crowds largely believe that one day a Messiah will come with armies and swords and will destroy the Roman filth that has invaded their homeland. But until that day comes, they will show up every year and they will do this dance with Pilate in order to see one of their own be pardoned. The trumpets from the temple on the other side of town mark the beginning of the day, and that's around the time that they see their religious rulers, their chief priests, elders, and even their temple police leaving the city and coming across the wall towards the entrance for Pilate. This was not normal. The crowds would have tried to move closer to hear and to see. They see an exchange with a prisoner with the Roman guards, and it looks like the governor is speaking to our religious leaders. Eventually, Pilate himself would address the crowds, and that's where we'll pick up in Luke 23:4. Pilate says, "I find no basis for an accusation against this man." And of course, at this point, a murmur spreads, reminding the crowd that they are here for. They're here to free one of their own sons. A name is quickly spread throughout the crowd, Barabbas. We want Barabbas. For them, Barabbas is a symbol. He's the kind of Messiah that they are looking for, the kind of man that will do anything to save them from this Roman occupation. Mark 15, verse 6 says, "Now at the festival," and this is talking about Pilate, "he used to release a prisoner for them, anyone for whom they asked. Now a man called Barabbas was in prison with the insurrectionists who had committed murder during the insurrection. So the crowd came and began to ask Pilate to do for them according to his custom. Then he answered them, 'Do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews?'" And for the crowds, this is the first time they're hearing that phrase, the King of the Jews, today. And it's chilling because that phrase echoes of the massacres of times past, of the times of Herod. Luke 23:18 continues, "Then they all shouted out together, 'Away with this fellow, away! Release Barabbas for us.' The crowds then stay uniformed in their demand for Barabbas. From that point forward, they hear cries and they repeat them. Mark 15:12, Pilate spoke to them again, saying, 'Then what do you wish me to do with this man you call the King of the Jews?' And they shouted back, 'Crucify him.' Some time passes as Pilate goes in and out, speaking to their rulers again and again. John 19, verse 15, these crowds, they cry out, away with him, crucify him. The crowds can see Pilate washing his hands now. And by this point, they have formed a consensus, unified in their desire for Barabbas. Matthew 27, verse 25, then the people who answered, the people as a whole answered, his blood be on us and on our children. For the crowds, the deed is done. They have rescued their hero, their son, Barabbas. They will disperse and go on to celebrate the Passover now. In their minds, by freeing Barabbas, they have secured their culture. But let's zoom in, because that's not the whole story. Let's look at the rulers and rank. The chief priests, the elders, some Pharisees, their scribes, and even the temple police, these Jews would have all been collectively known as their religious rulers. And I'm calling them rulers because it's just a lot shorter. So to give you a little background on them, their story actually started 8 days back when they first got word of the raising of Lazarus. That very night, they heard about it. They called an emergency meeting, and they shared their fears. In John 11:48, we get a peek into this meeting. They said, if we let him go on like this, talking about Jesus, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and destroy both our holy place and our nation. Caiaphas, their high priest, would then say in verse 50, it is better for you to have one man die for the people than to have the whole nation destroyed. At first glance, this seems like quite a rational argument. These rulers would almost immediately expand their scope, however, to include more than one man because they almost immediately planned to also kill Lazarus. However, all their plans would have utterly failed had Jesus not chosen to come to the temple on the 8th of Nisan. Do you remember the triumphant entry, the time when they all called out, Hosanna, and Jesus entered the temple? Well, these rulers would remember that time as well. That is the moment that he reached their attention the most, and they reacquired him as a target. That's at the same moment, by the way, that the lambs and goats were being carried into the temple for their initial inspection and being chosen to be sacrificed. At that same moment, these rulers chose Jesus as a sacrifice. But they had to watch and wait as Jesus drew more and more attention, unable to catch him alone. Jesus would continue to teach there, and what's worse, he upset the temple economy by rooting out their thievery that he saw there. That extortion had been helping these rulers build their economic status. So now they saw Jesus as a triple threat. He was a threat not only to their teaching, but also to their authority, and now to their finances. In short, Jesus had become a threat to all the things that made up their rank among the people. So they moved quickly then. They had an extremely tight deadline. They needed to get Jesus processed through the Sanhedrin and in front of Pilate by the Passover, or their moment of opportunity would be lost forever. They likely broke some rules to do this. The only two credible witnesses that they were able to gather had competing and incorrect testimonies. They still rushed this case through to the last moment, and that's where the story picks back up. John 18, verse 28. They then took Jesus from Caiaphas to Pilate's headquarters. It was early in the morning. They themselves did not enter the headquarters so as to avoid ritual defilement and to be able to eat the Passover. So the Roman praetorium would have been filled with symbols of Rome and idols to other gods. So these rulers believed that if they stepped into their praetorium, that it would defile them, make them unclean. And yet they had no qualms about pushing Jesus into there. Luke 23, verse 2 says, they begun to accuse him, saying, we found this man inciting our nation, a lie, forbidding us to pay taxes to Caesar, another lie, and saying that he himself is the Messiah, a king, a misquote. Notice the rulers did not seem to have any qualms about lying to Rome, to Caesar, because to them, he was filth. So Pilate began to question their accusations. And the rulers didn't like this. They weren't expecting this. They got a little offended. In John 18, verse 30, they answered, if this man were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you. Then in verse 31, they explain, we are not permitted to put anyone to death. See, the rulers are patting themselves on the back here for bringing someone to Rome, handing him over. They consider him an enemy of the state, and they're surprised that Rome isn't immediately jumping on board. Pilate doesn't pick up the narrative that they're dropping. So the accusations continue to build up steam. Mark 15, verse 3, then the chief priests accused him of many things. But they were insistent and said, and this is in Luke 23:5, he stirs up the people by teaching through all Judea, from Galilee, where he began, even to this place. Pilate hears that and then leaves for a while. They don't really know why yet, but this gives them time they need to do some crowd control, because Pilate still isn't picking up their narrative. Matthew 27, verse 20, now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus killed. When Pilate comes back, he offers to release Jesus, but the crowd at this point is primed to refuse. John 18, verse 40, they shouted in reply, not this man, but Barabbas. See, some of the crowd still don't even know who this man is. I think that's interesting. They're just following the words of their rulers. Sometime later, the Romans brought Jesus back out, flogged and insulted. And again, the rulers were ready for this moment. They had squelched their sympathy. In John 19, verse 6, when the chief priests and the police saw him, they shouted, crucify him, crucify him. These chief priests and their temple police intentionally instigate the crowd towards violence. They're using the crowd to add pressure to Pilate. But Pilate is still reluctant. He's not on board with the idea that Jesus is a threat to Caesar, as the rulers had theorized. Remember, the rulers had rationalized that this was what was going to prevent Rome from destroying them. Of course, Caesar's going to want this man dead. But instead of stopping, the rulers doubled down when Pilate doesn't pick that up. Now they use Jewish law. Look at John 19, verse 7. The Jews answered him, we have a law, and according to that law, he ought to die, because he is claimed to be the Son of God. Pilate hears this, goes back inside for a while, but when he returns, he continues to suggest that they ask for Jesus' release. Since Jewish law didn't sway him, they then go on their Roman offensive. In John 19, verse 12, the Jews cried out, if you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Everyone who claims to be a king sets himself against Caesar. And again, Pilate disappears for a while after this point is made. While he's gone, the rulers realize that invoking Caesar was the last tool that they needed to sway Pilate to see things that their way. So when he returns with Jesus one last time, they're ready with their final response. In John 19, verse 15, Pilate asked them, shall I crucify your king? The chief priests answered, we have no king but Caesar. And for them, the deed is done. They can soon rejoin their high priest Caiaphas at the temple and pretend that they have averted another temple destruction. In their minds, by eliminating this threat, the rulers have secured their rank. But wait, there's more to the story, isn't there? Let's zoom in one more step. Let's look at Pilate and profession. I'll skip the background for him. Let's start in John 18, verse 29. So Pilate went out to them and said, what accusation do you bring against this man? Verse 31, Pilate said to them, take him yourselves and judge him according to your law. Continuing in verse 33, then Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoned Jesus, and asked him, are you the king of the Jews? Jesus answered, do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me? Pilate replied, I'm not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done? Pilate still thinks that Jesus may still have some sort of earthly kingdom, some sort of group that's fighting for him. In verse 36, Jesus answered, my kingdom does not belong to this world. If my kingdom belonged to this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here. Jesus is saying, Pilate, my kingdom is out of your jurisdiction. You see, I have no armies, no defense attorneys, no counter-arguments, because the kingdom of God is not of this world and does not need defending. Verse 37, Pilate then asked, "So you are a king?" You see, he's starting to get the sense that this man is a little more than he appears. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." And then Pilate asked him, "What is truth?" This likely confuses Pilate. You see, the truth mentioned by Jesus is a kind of truth with possession. It's not the kind of truth you can find and then wield like a weapon, as the Pharisees do. It's not the kind of truth that you can discover and then use as a fulcrum to control the masses, as the Romans do. Jesus speaks of a different kind of truth. This truth, when you discover it, it becomes your homeland. You belong to it. After Pilate responded, he immediately went out to the Jews again and told them, "I find no case against him." But the rulers are insistent, remember. They expand their story now, mentioning Galilee, and in this, Pilate sees an opportunity to salvage the situation. Finally, a way to pass on responsibility and maybe boost his career at the same time. Luke 23, verse 6. Then Pilate heard this. He asked whether this man was a Galilean, and he learned that he was under Herod's jurisdiction. He sent him off to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at that time. But this plan only partially works. This does heal a rift between Pilate and Herod, we find out, but Herod Antipas passes the responsibility back to Pilate. Luke 23, verse 13 continues, Pilate then called together the chief priests, the leaders, and the people, and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who is inciting the people, and here I have examined him in your presence, and have not found this man guilty of any of your charges against him. Neither has Herod, for he sent him back to us. Indeed, he has done nothing to deserve death. I will therefore have him flogged and release him." At this point, the crowd starts asking that he give out the pardon that he's usually known to do, and Pilate leaps on that opportunity. Mark 15, 9 through 10 says, "Then he answered them, 'Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?' For he realized it was out of jealousy that the chief priests had handed him over." So from here on out in his story, he continues to use the phrase, "the king of the Jews," to dig at the insecurities and the jealousy that he sees in the rulers. Matthew 27, verse 21, the governor again said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Luke 23, verse 20, Pilate, wanting to release Jesus, addressed them again, but they kept shouting, "Crucify him, crucify him." Luke 23, verse 22, a third time he said to them, "Why? What evil has he done? I have found in him no ground for the sentence of death. I will therefore have him flogged and then release him." A second time he offers this compromise. He's hoping that if they see him flogged, they'll back off. John 19, verse 1, then Pilate took Jesus, had him flogged, and the soldiers wove a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they dressed him in a purple robe. They kept coming up to him saying, "Hail, King of the Jews," and striking him on the face. Pilate went out again and said to them, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no case against him." So Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." Notice Jesus is likely no longer bound. Pilate at this moment is ready to release him, and he's hoping that they'll take that. But as we know, the rulers began their chant immediately. Pilate starts to get angry. Let's take a look at John 19, verse 6. Pilate then said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him. I find no case against him." And he knows they won't. Then the rulers explained that Jesus should die because he is claimed to be the Son of God. John 19, verse 8. Now, when Pilate heard this, he was more afraid than ever. So let me ask you, church, why was Pilate afraid? Why was he more afraid now when he heard that this man is called God? Is he starting to believe that Jesus is more than a man? Or does he realize that many would believe that after talking to him? He also realizes that he has just had that very man flogged and publicly humiliated. Resuming in John 19, verse 9, he entered his headquarters again and asked Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. Pilate therefore said to him, "Do you refuse to speak to me? Do you not know that I have the power to release you and the power to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no power over me unless it had been given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of the greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to release him. This is where the rulers switch tactics. They start shouting that Pilate is against Caesar. He's been on thin ice as a governor up to this point, so this really gets to him. He starts to weaken. In verse 13, when Pilate hears these words, he brought Jesus outside and sat on the judge's bench at the place called the Stone Pavement, or in Hebrew, Gabbatha. John 19, verse 14, "Now it was the day of preparation for the Passover, and it was about noon. He said to the Jews, 'Here is your king.'" Again, Pilate makes one last dig at the jealousy of the rulers, but it does nothing. And finally, in Luke 23, verse 23, the continuous and urgent demands of the people finally prevail. Matthew 27, verse 24, "So when Pilate saw that he could do nothing, but rather a riot was beginning, he took some water and he washed his hands before the crowd, saying, 'I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves.'" Pilate feels the pressure to maintain the peace, but he pushes the blame immediately to the rulers and throws in that one last dig. He knows that the Jews want clean hands right now, and he's verbally placing the blood on their hands, portraying them as unclean, at least in principle. Luke 23, verse 24, "So Pilate gave his verdict that their demand should be granted. He released the man they asked for, the one that had been put in prison for insurrection and murder, and he handed Jesus over as they wished. And for him, the deed was done. He would go on about his day. In his mind, by ending that one life, he secured his profession. But wait, can we zoom in a little further? Let's talk about the Lamb and the light. Have you ever wondered what Jesus was thinking during this whole trial? You may think that we don't have enough scriptures to really know that. He says almost nothing. But if you look back at his teachings, it's actually pretty clear. He has left breadcrumbs for us to find. So if you have questions like I do, you might be able to find the answers. And so I'm going to go through 6 quick little questions. 1, is the Lamb afraid of the people who want to kill him? Matthew 10:28. He said, "Do not fear those who would kill the body but cannot kill the soul." So no, the Lamb did not fear these men. Does the Lamb hate these people for what they are doing? Matthew 5:44. He said, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." And we know he felt this way because it's confirmed in Luke 23:34 when he actually does that out loud. 3rd question. Is the Lamb offended when he's being persecuted? Matthew 5:10, he said, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Did you think he wouldn't practice what he preached? Do you think he wouldn't count this blessing in the end? Why is the Lamb silent through most of this questioning? Matthew 7:6, he gives an answer to that. "Do not give what is holy to dogs, and do not throw your pearls before swine, or they will trample them underfoot and turn and maul you." See, they weren't ready for the truth that he had to offer, and they weren't truthfully seeking that truth. Sometimes people just ask questions because they want to dig at you. They want to get something from you that they can nibble on. So he answers some questions, and he is silent for the others because he loves them. Remember, he loves them even through all of this. 5th question, is the Lamb made unclean by these things that are done to him? Remember, Jesus saw the chief priests carefully avoiding stepping into the praetorium for fear of contamination by the Roman images that were in there. But his comments in Mark 7:15 are clear about this. He said, "There is nothing outside a person that by going into him can defile him, but the things that come out of a person are what defile him." See, the Lamb is a witness when the crowds defile themselves by calling out his blood be on us and on our children. The Lamb is a witness when the rulers defile themselves by calling out, "We have no king but Caesar." And the Lamb is a witness when Pilate defiles himself with the lie, "I am innocent of this man's blood," just before calling for the crucifixion. So no, Jesus was not the one being made unclean here. And my last question, why didn't the Lamb fight back? Surely he could have. He was right there in front of the government. He could have changed everything in that moment. Matthew 5:38, Jesus gives us an answer. "But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also." See, he taught us how to face evil, how to not return violence with violence, how to not return insult with insult. We know now that that backhanded slap across the right side of the face was intended to be a dehumanizing gesture at that time. It wasn't just physically painful, it was emotionally painful. So Jesus gave a subversive solution with that illustration. Instead of escalating like an animal as expected, he taught to force the abuser to confront you as a human. So in order for them to do more violence, verbal or otherwise, they must confront themselves in the face of his silence and his lack of rising to the bait. They now need to confront themselves as the uncontrolled animal in this scenario. So when he's struck, he does not lash out. When he's insulted, he does not return with insult. And by turning the cheek, Jesus turns this trial around onto his accusers and creates a learning opportunity for them all, because remember, he loves them. Church, it is not his kingdom that was on trial that day. It's theirs. It's ours. It's the kingdom of men. For the crowds, it was their kingdom of culture on trial. As a result of their decisions, their cultural identity will be systematically scattered by the Romans. For the rulers, it was their kingdom of rank on trial. For their corruption will lead to their future revolts, and Rome will take their possessions, their wealth, their temple, all of it. For Pilate, it was his kingdom of profession on trial. His brutality here would go on to cause more brutality, and he would be removed from office in a few short years, and he will face a bitter end. But unlike these other parties in this story, the Lamb is not led by fear. The Lamb has a kingdom that needs no defense here. The Lamb brings light that exposes truth for us. So, church, what kingdom do you serve? Do you fear the loss of your culture? Is that what you defend, like the crowds? Do you fear the loss of your rank, like the rulers? Is that what you defend? Do you fear the loss of your profession, like Pilate? Is that what you defend? Or do you fear nothing because you serve the kingdom of God, like the Lamb? Is there something weighing heavily on you today, keeping you from living more fully in his kingdom? Do you think the Lamb is just waiting for you to surrender one last worldly kingdom? If we can assist you in coming to Christ, or if you need any prayers or support, anything you need, we invite you to come now as we stand and sing.